Climate change is a hugely complex issue. We have all seen images from around the world showing the obvious effects of a changing climate. I work for Christian Aid here in Ghana, and in recent years we've experienced less and less rain. The chances of crops getting to harvest are not as good as they were. Even though this place looks reasonably green, here too the effects of changing climate is changing lives. I know Christian Aid supporters donate money to help communities living in poverty. I also know you spend time and energy fighting injustices on behalf of the world's poorest people. Campaigning is already shaping UK government policies, forcing it to take the subject seriously. We know it's time for climate justice. We hope you do too. In Kenya, droughts which used to come every 9 years are now coming every 3 years, leading to severe water shortages and the death of livestock. In India, monsoons have become more erratic, affecting crop planting cycles and harvest. And here in Ghana, rains are coming later, the whole farming cycle is changing, and crop yields are falling. Christian Aid and its partners are working across the developing world to help communities to adapt to the changes in their climate. But without urgent action to cut global carbon emissions, the situation can only get worse. Climate scientists predict that up to 3 billion people could lose access to safe water and millions of livelihoods lost. Climate change is threatening years of development progress. You have a great history of campaigning. You helped overturn the injustices of apartheid, unfair trade, and debt. Now, tackling climate change has to be at the top of everyone's agenda in the fight to eradicate global poverty. To bring about climate justice, rich countries need to reduce their emissions. They also need to provide resources to fund clean technologies in poorer countries and help them cope with the hardships brought by climate change. These are not easy asks, especially in this current economic climate. Politicians, and indeed your friends and neighbors, need to hear the call for climate justice. They need to hear that the cost of not acting is far higher than the resources needed to act now. We need you to join this global movement, working together to call for climate justice. Christian Aid's climate campaigning began with big business. It's challenged key UK companies to declare and cut their carbon emissions. You then called on the UK government to set the country's 2050 emissions reduction target of 80%. And you succeeded in getting company emissions reporting on the table for further discussion.
Can you tip your signs up? People in Kent not holding your signs up. Norfolk, can we see it please?
In autumn 2008, the countdown to Copenhagen began, calling on world leaders to agree a fair, ambitious and binding climate change deal when they met in Denmark. The campaign spread way beyond the UK borders, with European church agencies and campaigners from around the world joining the fight for climate justice.
When do we want climate justice? When do we want it now?
By the time the Christian Aid delegation reached Copenhagen in 2009, over 500,000 countdown to Copenhagen pledges had been collected. And more than 50,000 campaigners marched through London and cities in Scotland and Ireland calling for climate justice.
Being in Copenhagen was strange. It was kind of surreal. It was incredibly inspiring while we were there. People there from civil society all around the world, people actually affected by climate change in some of the poorest countries, all stood shoulder to shoulder together, calling for climate justice. It was incredible to be there.
Despite a groundswell of public pressure and a media storm, negotiators failed to agree an effective climate deal. Once again, the world's richest nations failed to put poor people first and address the challenge of climate change.
Coming home from Copenhagen was quite strange. At the end of it, it felt like the talks hadn't really come to that much at all. I don't think that Copenhagen was ever going to be the end of it anyway. Even if things had gone better, we would still have to be lobbying and pushing businesses and governments to be doing their bit. So it just means we have to carry on that bit harder.
UK campaigners have fought for and won strong domestic legislation. Their job now is to hold government to account, to make sure it follows through on promises made. It is possible to build a green economy as well as setting it on a course to a low-carbon future. And on the global stage, a fair, ambitious and binding international climate change deal can still be won. This deal must include money to help poor communities in areas like this to adapt to and cope with changing climates. About a quarter of the world's population have no access to electricity. This lack of energy has kept people trapped in poverty. And that poverty is getting worse because of climate change. If people in poorer countries had helped to gain access to new, low-carbon sources of energy, that cycle could be broken. In 2006, Christian Aid campaigners called for an end to economic conditions being placed on poor countries in return for aid and loans. The pressure paid off, and the UK government withheld £50 million from the World Bank. It's time to take another look at the World Bank, and this time call for it to stop funding huge fossil fuel projects that are making climate change worse. Renewable energy sources are abundant in the developing world, and we believe this is where the World Bank should invest to stimulate green development and help people out of poverty. Whether you are a letter writer, a demonstrator, or a preacher, there's a role for you to play in the Time for Climate Justice campaign. Please do all you can, but also help invite others to join the campaign. Climate change is a reality for the world's poorest, and it's making poverty permanent. Across the world, activists are speaking out. Please help make this call louder. Every year, 300,000 people in developing countries die from the effects of climate change, a problem they did not create. It's time for climate justice. Join us now to play your part in the campaign.